Chapter 1. Wrecker had just arrived at the favorite meeting spot of his and Vincent's. Though he was a few minutes early, he looked over at the door and saw the burly man at his usual spot, indicating his host for the meeting was already waiting inside. Wrecker got out of his car and walked over to the front entrance, opening his coat to remove his gun. The guard put his hand up to stop him. "Boss says you can keep your guns from now on," the man said. "Oh? Guess he figured since you saved his life, you get a free pass now." "Well, I suppose I'm entitled to some benefits from it," Wrecker said. Wrecker walked through the door and was immediately greeted by Malloy. Though a mutual respect had grown between the two men over the years, they still weren't on handshake terms upon seeing each other. It was the same as always. They gave each other a slight nod, then moved on to their business. Wrecker went down to the usual table, sitting across from Vincent, who had just finished his breakfast. "Mike, how are you?" Vincent asked. "Fine." Vincent pointed to his plate. "Can I offer you something?" "No, I'm good." "Had a feeling you would be. I know you usually don't join me in these little excursions, so I took the liberty of eating beforehand." "My eating habits have changed a little bit lately. Eating more healthy, home-cooked stuff." "A wise decision on your part," Vincent said, patting his stomach. "I think I might have put on a few extra pounds from all these outside meals I've had." The two men shared a laugh at his self-deprecation, though Wrecker was still in the dark as to what the meeting was about. When Malloy called him to request it, he didn't give any indications as to the topic they'd be discussing. And Wrecker couldn't figure out on his own what Vincent may have wanted. It had been 3 months since Wrecker and Haley took out the assassin who was gunning for the crime boss. Since that violent day, they'd kept their distance from each other, though not necessarily on purpose. They just had no other business that required their cooperation in that time. As far as Wrecker knew, nothing major had happened recently that would cause either of them to need assistance on anything, so he was at a loss as to what he was really doing there. And Vincent wasn't one to always get straight to the point. Sometimes he liked to run in circles for a little while, until he reached his destination. Something Wrecker would just as soon avoid. "So what's this about?" Wrecker said, hoping to speed things up a bit. Vincent smiled, always appreciating how his guest liked to skip the formalities and get down to business. "Always the straight shooter," Wrecker shrugged. "I don't know. I just figure we're both busy people, have a lot on our plate. Why prolong things? Plus, we're on good terms, no need to beat around the bush, right?" "Indeed," Vincent said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I just thought we might chat about a few things that have happened over the last several months. Some things that I've been hearing." "Such as?" Wrecker asked, not having the slightest idea about what he was inferring. "Well, I've been hearing that business has picked up quite a bit on your end." "It's pretty steady. That's really nothing new." "No, but you must be tired. You seem to be spreading yourself pretty thin lately." Wrecker shook his head, knowing there was something else Vincent was leading up to. "I'm holding up just fine." "I'm sure. You have broad shoulders, a passion for this line of work that never dies or wanes." Wrecker grinned and scratched the back of his head, still waiting for the purpose of the meeting. He wasn't yet irritated by the runaround, but was growing a little impatient. He tossed his left hand in the air to indicate he didn't have any response. "Very well, I'll stop this little charade that we're having," Vincent said, picking up on Wrecker's clue that he wasn't partaking in the game anymore. "I'd appreciate it." "There's been some rumors, some rumblings, that you've expanded your operation lately." "There has?" Vincent nodded. "It's been brought to my attention that there have been witnesses to you working with another man. Word seems to be getting around." Wrecker looked stone-faced, as he knew Vincent usually picked up on visual clues to his questions as much as he listened to the actual responses. And this was a question he really had no interest in answering. "You know you should never believe everything you hear," Wrecker said. "A very good business practice." "So, is that it? That's what this is about? The possibility of me having more assistants out there?" Vincent nodded and looked at the ceiling, measuring his words carefully. We have a good relationship that we've built up over the years. Whether you have other people you're working with or not isn't really of my concern. You'll do your business in whatever way you see fit. Then, what's the issue? Well, as you know, a man in my position has to be well aware of what's going on around him. Has to know all the possible players in the field. Who's on the same side, who are the enemies, what might be some possible situations that could have to be dealt with at some later date in the future. Whether these so-called rumors are true or not isn't really something you need to be concerned with, Recker said, still not giving in. Well, that might be something that we disagree on, Vincent replied, motioning with his hands for emphasis before folding them together on the table. You should know that whether I do or do not have help out in the field isn't something you need to worry about. It has nothing to do with our arrangement. Vincent nodded, knowing he was unlikely to pry out of his visitor the information he was seeking, though he still felt the need to ask the questions. So, if these rumors turned out to be true, then presumably it might be something as simple as just having someone out there to watch my back. Hypothetically speaking, Recker said, sticking to his guns and not revealing what they both knew to be true. It wasn't necessarily that he was trying to hide the information from Vincent. Recker always knew he'd probably be among the first to find out, especially with his contacts all over the city. It was more of a personal thing with Recker. He just didn't want to admit to anyone there was a new member of their operation before it was necessary. For Vincent's part, he wasn't going to continue to force the issue. He felt he had the answer to his question, whether Recker admitted it or not. I can see how, hypothetically, something like that might be a good idea, Vincent said. Especially with some of the situations you wind up getting placed in. Yeah. I hope you don't mind the probing questions. I'm sure you understand my position, always having to be aware of any new players in town. No, I get it. But as far as you and I are concerned, nothing changes. Good to know. So how has David been these past few months? Good. Busy. I can imagine. An operation such as yours must take a lot of time to maintain. Recker shrugged. We make do. I guess if you did ever take on another partner, it'd enable you to spend more time at home with your girlfriend. Recker's eyes almost bulged out of his head, hearing him talk about his girlfriend. It wasn't something he'd ever mentioned in any of their conversations. He hoped Vincent wasn't about to strong-arm him the way Jeremiah tried to, putting Mia in the middle of things. Vincent could see his guest looked a little unnerved with his statement and tried to put his mind at ease. Relax, Vincent said, putting his hand out. I'm not trying to dig into your personal life or create some type of friction or anything. I've already heard how that turns out. Recker lifted his head up, not saying a word. But he didn't have to. His facial expressions did all the talking for him. Yes, I've heard about how Jeremiah tried to use her to get to me. How? Recker asked. You forget there are still a few of Jeremiah's men roaming around, Vincent said. I've been able to have the pleasure of speaking with a few of them. And what'd they have to say? Just how they tried to use the girl to persuade you to do their dirty work. Obviously, that was an epic fail on their part. It would be an epic fail on anyone's part, Recker said, trying to give a warning without making a direct threat. Nobody would ever use Mia to get to him again. I would agree. She was the nurse that I helped to rescue, wasn't she? Vincent asked with a smile. Recker shuffled around in his seat, just about ready to light into his host with a bunch of words he probably shouldn't say. He somehow could put those thoughts aside for the moment and remain diplomatic. And just what do you plan to do with all this newfound knowledge of yours? Nothing, Vincent answered. We're just two friends sitting here, discussing our lives like regular people do. Except we're not regular people. True. But I think it only serves to strengthen the bond between us. There are rumors that there is another dangerous person in town, perhaps working with you, perhaps not. But I'm not worrying about it because you have told me there is nothing to worry about. Yeah, Wrecker said, knowing he wasn't done with his speech. And I know you have a girlfriend who works at a hospital. A woman who has been caught up in a dangerous game before by a man who was obviously losing his grip. And it's not something you should worry about, because I'm telling you there's nothing to worry about. I think I see where you're going with this. We've been through a lot together these past few years, haven't we? Vincent asked, almost happily recalling memories most normal people would rather forget. Yeah, I guess we have. So how's it felt being the only main player in town these past few months? Well, there's always going to be a minor nuisance here and there. People who want a bigger piece of the pie. Nothing that's really at a threatening level, though. And are you satisfied with that? The power and territory that you have now? Or is there still more you'd like to accomplish? Well, as you know, my enemy's disappearing these past couple of years has happened at a surprising and breakneck speed. There's still much to do just maintaining and growing the business of what I have now. I'm quite comfortable in that for now. The two men continued talking for another 20 minutes or so, neither saying anything of much significance. It was mostly just small talk, passing the time. As they both got ready to leave, though, Vincent dropped another little bomb in Wrecker's direction. Before we go, there was one more small thing that I wanted to talk to you about, Vincent said. Which is? As you know, I have several members of the police department at my disposal. Yeah, Wrecker asked, not sure where this dialogue was going. How would you feel about meeting one of them? I've already had the pleasure. If you recall, that was one of the conditions of Jeremiah's demise. Vincent feigned a look of ignorance. Yes, of course. This would be someone different, though. Someone who is very interested in meeting you. I can't say I share the same viewpoint, Wrecker said, not sounding the slightest bit interested in the proposal. I'll pass it along. Just out of curiosity, who would this officer be? A detective. And just why does he want to meet me? He's a fan of your work, Vincent said. Excuse me if I'm not all warm and fuzzy about being someone's idol, but I don't think I mix particularly well with those on the other side of the line. Understood, but he's not looking to arrest you. I believe he has some business he's interested in discussing with you. So, why can't you just tell me what it is? Vincent shrugged. Because I don't know all the particulars. I believe it's a police matter. And he didn't share with you? Well, just because he's on my payroll doesn't mean he isn't his own person. I don't get first-hand knowledge of everything that comes across his desk. Just the things that pertain to you? Wrecker asked. Or things that I have a personal interest or stake in. I'm not sure that meeting with a detective is something I'm really interested in doing right now. I don't think it's too wise for me to play around too frequently with people who have the ability to lock me up. As you wish. I'll deliver the news, if that's your final answer. I'm sure he can make it worth your while, though. No, it's okay. I still think I'll pass on the offer. The more I associate with the police, the surer I'd be that something would eventually go wrong. Always play things cautiously, Vincent said. No different than you, right? Vincent nodded. The two men only talked for a few minutes more before Wrecker excused himself and left the diner. He called Jones as soon as he left to let him know there wasn't anything that needed to be worked imminently. As he sat there in his truck, he looked over at the diner again, thinking about some of the things that were said. It was a strange request, he thought, Vincent asking him to meet with a police officer. Wrecker wasn't sure what to make of it. There was obviously a reason for it, and it was probably a big one. But whatever it was, if it was as big as he imagined it was, he assumed he'd be hearing from Vincent again on the subject. When Wrecker got back to the office, Jones and Haley were sitting side by side, analyzing some information they'd been working on. Wrecker poured himself a cup of coffee and walked over to the window, not wanting to say anything to the pair and throw their concentration off. Are you just going to ignore us, Michael? Jones asked. Wrecker turned around to face them. Looked like you were in deep thought there. Didn't want to disturb you two lovebirds. Haley chuckled as he kept his eyes glued to the screen. Jones, though, pushed his chair away from the desk to further engage his friend. Wrecker's eyes danced around the room like he was thinking about something. It was one of the clues Jones had picked up on in the time they'd been together. It usually was an indication something was bugging Wrecker, and usually it wasn't a minor thing. "So, what is it?" Jones asked. "What's what?" "You know, that thing you're thinking about." "What makes you think I'm thinking about something?" Wrecker asked. "Do we really have to play this game? Whenever you have a problem or something on your mind that you're not ready to discuss, you have that look on your face." "What look?" "The look you have right now," Jones said. "The one where you have trouble focusing on anyone in particular. You look out the window, glance at the floor, sometimes the wall, perhaps the ceiling, or maybe a few other inanimate objects." "Do you analyze me often, Doctor?" "Just when the situation calls for it." "Oh, very scholarly of you, Professor." "So, would you rather just get it out now, or do you want to have a song and dance for a couple of hours first?" Jones asked. "Oh, I don't know. Who's going to lead?" Wrecker said, continuing with the joke. "I mean, I forgot to bring my dancing shoes with me today." While Wrecker didn't look very amused, Haley couldn't help but laugh again, overhearing their conversation, though he was still typing away on the computer. "So, I take it you're insisting on the let's talk for a while until I pry it out of you method?" Jones asked. Wrecker tried to keep a straight face and continue with the charade, but just couldn't hold it in anymore and let out a laugh as well. Jones took a step back and took turns looking at his two silencers and simply shook his head. "I was hoping your sense of humor wouldn't emulate his," Jones said, looking at Haley. Haley didn't reply. He just smiled and went back to what he was doing. Wrecker seemed to be enjoying the back-and-forth tug he and Jones were having, but he figured enough was enough and finally came clean with what was on his mind. "If you must know, I was thinking about Vincent," Wrecker said. Jones scrunched his eyebrows together, wondering why the crime boss would be deep in his friend's thought process. "Why would you be thinking about him? You said nothing of much interest was said at the meeting. Was there more?" Wrecker shrugged as his eyes shot past Jones, looking at different parts of the room. "Well, I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know? Either something was said or it wasn't." "Right before leaving, Vincent asked if I wanted to meet with a detective that was on his payroll." Jones looked perplexed by the request. "For what purpose?" "He wouldn't tell me." "Seems a bit odd." "I know. I can't figure out what it could have been about." "Was it any of the ones that you met outside Jeremiah's house on that final day?" Wrecker shook his head. "No," said it was someone else. "But Vincent said it wasn't of his asking." "What do you mean?" "Vincent said this guy, this detective, asked to meet with me. Had nothing to do with Vincent. He was just acting as the intermediary." "Well, that is strange indeed." "You don't think Vincent could be setting you up for something, do you?" Haley asked, finally injecting himself into the conversation. "No. I think we're still on as good terms as we've always been," Wrecker replied. "I wonder what it could be about," Jones said. "I don't know. I'm sure we'll find out soon enough, though. Were there any other interesting nuggets from the meeting you'd care to disclose?" Wrecker shrugged. He said he's heard rumors of another person being with me, so he asked if we had a new man in the operation." "Oh?" "I didn't confirm or deny anything." "Well, if you don't deny something, it's as much of a confirmation as actually confirming it," Jones said. "Yeah, but I did it in a much more amusing way." "Oh, well, as long as you had fun with it," Jones said, rolling his eyes. "He knows we've got another man, whether I actually admit it or not. The only thing he's really worried about is knowing who it is." "Why?" Haley asked. "You don't get to his level without knowing every person in the city who's capable of posing a threat to him at some point," Wrecker answered. "He just wants to make sure you're not someone he has to worry about in the future." "So, will he?" "No, I basically told him how it is. He's not going to concern himself with it too much now." "How can you be so sure?" Jones asked. If you recall, he poked around quite a bit. Asked several questions to try to get to the bottom of our operation initially. Unless, of course, you forget about Mia and I ducking out on Malloy down at the university. I haven't forgotten. Then how do you know he won't try to find out Chris's identity? Because we came to an understanding, Wrecker said. An understanding? Care to expand on that? He took me at my word that our new man has nothing to do with him and is nothing he needs to be concerned with. He did. Seems very unlike him to just accept something like that so easily. Well, it also might have something to do with me taking him at his word about something. Which is? He knows about Mia, Wrecker said. Jones just stared at him for a few moments. You'll have to divulge a little more. He's always known about Mia. He knows she's my girlfriend. As soon as he said the words, Jones stood there, stunned. Haley, too, stopped what he was doing and looked at Wrecker. It was a startling revelation for them. Seeing as how you don't seem too terribly upset, I take it you're satisfied with whatever it was that Vincent told you? Jones said. Well, he said he's heard about why that little beef with me and Jeremiah happened, with Mia being used as bait. And he knows where she's working. Well, we've always suspected that. Yeah, but that's why he's not worried about Haley. He doesn't need to worry about our secret, and I don't need to worry about his. So he's basically letting you know he knows about Mia, but he'll never do anything to her unless he's provoked, Haley said. That's basically the size of it. Is there anything else you'd like to share about this meeting? Jones said in a huff. No, that was it. That was it. You initially told me nothing interesting happened, and yet you just disclosed 3 different topics that were extremely noteworthy. Are you sure there's nothing else you'd like to share? No, that's it. It seems as though we have different definitions of what's important. Wrecker shrugged again, not giving it much more thought. Even if the other things can be shrugged off, I do wonder what that business with the police is about, Jones said. Well, if there's one thing I'm sure about when it comes to dealing with Vincent. What? We'll find out soon enough.